and the waiting room. Hi, everybody. Welcome to our Thursday book launch. My name is Malika Albrecht, and I'm the founding editor of Redheaded Stepchild. We will open again for submissions in August. So if you've ever been rejected, we'd love to dumpster dive and would love to see your rejects. I'm super excited tonight because I have a husband and wife team, and I know a little bit about Pat's work, and Resa and I have had a chance to kind of talk, and I got to see a couple of photographs. So I'm super excited to see this whole collection and how the collaboration came about. And y'all get to also think of any questions that you might have for them. I'm going to do just a brief intro. And Pat, I chose a section where you talk about the collection as a whole, because I thought this would be a great launch pad for this. In some ways, this is from Pat. In some ways, this volume is my collected poems. If collected poems are a product not of the poet's age and health, but of the age of the poems in the book. Among the poems that appear in this book, for instance, Manassas, it's the oldest. It was written nearly 50 years ago, shortly after I took a teaching job at Northern Virginia Community College in Manassas, adjacent to the Manassas Battlefield Park. Manassas won the Four Quarters Poetry Prize from LaSalle University in 1978. I remarked then, formally and informally, on what I have repeated often over the past half century, my belief that poetry has potential to stand for a great many things in our culture, including our evolving understanding of the world, and maybe it does. Pat, thank you so much for coming on and launching and celebrating this book with us. Glad to have you.
Thank you so much. Thank you for sharing that, because one of the things I noticed when you were reading is that on the one hand, I'm objecting to being classified by age, but on the other hand, I'm identifying myself as someone who's written poems 50 years ago, and I was just a young guy. So Resa tells me I'm still a young guy. But Malika, you've been so generous. Thank you so much. And I hope that people know how much you do for poets. And it's very generous of you to do this. And I'm so happy to be here and see longtime friends. I'm not going to call them old, Adrian. I'm not going to call you old. Chris, I don't know. I knew Chris at ECU. He was one of our creative writers there. And I believe he took a course from me, and I might have been on your thesis committee.
Yep, that's right.
And I've known Adrian, well, off and on. I think I ran into him one time in Hickory after I gave a reading at Lenore Ryan with Tim Peeler and Keith Flynn. And that was a wild night. You know, I can't remember walking into the bar, but I did end up on the bar and sat in the chair, and I didn't fall out. When I'm with Keith, you know,
yeah.
And then eventually, as things continued, Adrian asked me if I would be a member of his dissertation committee.
Yeah.
Which was a wonderful, wonderful experience to see a writer write about teaching writing in the way that he did, and to analyze the literature from his home country. And I'm hoping that book could get published. And I hope you're working on getting it ready.
We are.
If not, you know, let's stay in touch, and I'll encourage it. Okay, good.
Awesome.
Good. And I need to thank Resa too, because she's been a remarkable collaborator. And we were in South Africa about 11 or 12 years ago on a Fulbright that I had, and Resa was hired by the university there to kind of assist in developing a writing center and the writing and English program. See, Chris, this is some of the stuff that you can do when you try to connect these things.
Yeah.
And we went to a village. What was the name of it?
Cultural village.
It's a cultural village. And this guy sitting on the porch of one of the houses there, playing his harmonica, and another guy sat down next to him. I think he was beating a drum. And Resa took a picture of it, and that ended up being the cover photo for a previous book of mine. And when I read a book by Tim Peeler where he was combining poems with photos, And then with this whole movement toward acrostic poetry, I asked Resa if she would be interested in a collaboration with me. And, mercifully, she said yes. So when our son Antonio, Chris, do you remember Antonio when he was a baby? I think you might.
I think so. Yeah,
Yeah, he might have been gone by then.
I
Yeah,
might have been. I can't. I don't know. I know talking to you about it, but that's why.
yeah. Well, our sex talk. That's what that was explaining sex to you, that
Yeah,
it could
that's
end
right.
up like this.
That's right.
Yeah,
Yeah, that was the answer at the
exactly.
end. Yeah,
Yeah, that's
you get the
so
you
be
Antonio.
careful.
Yeah.
Yeah, and Antonio was going to start college, and we were going to go through the empty. We anticipated going through the empty nest thing that everyone goes through. And I said, well, look at these Manassas poems. Finally, are ready to go out as one volume. Some of them have been published in chapbooks previously, and I said, why don't we go to Manassas and take a few days, and I'll show you these places, and you take photos of them. We'll try to get the photos somehow to work with the poems, and you know how these things can go. We went there and we went over to. I remember we went to Stonebridge in particular, which is in a poem, and I'll talk about it. And I told Resa, I said, I've got this poem. So if you take a picture of Stonebridge from here, I think it'd work perfectly. And she said, why don't you walk away for about 10 minutes and I'll take care of the photography. So, I mean, that's how, and I stayed away and she did. If and when you see this book, you'll see that you see some of the photos tonight. They're about, I don't know, right near 50 poems in there and 50 photos. And they bring something, and I've been trying to think about this in the critical writing I've been doing, especially for Asheville Poetry Review, that we're no longer in an imagist period. And so we feel, I guess, that there's something missing. And so we replace the image in the poem with an image on the photo on the page beside it. And I think that it serves a real function as a kind of transition. So, now I taught on the Manassas Battlefield. There was a campus there of Northern Virginia Community College, and that would go all the way back to 1975. It's hard to imagine, but it does. And Manassas is where some historians, and this is the thing, this is, Adrian, I'm going to connect with your dissertation in some ways too. Some historians believe that that's where the first land battle of the Civil War took place. But what we're finding out about history is that it's interpretation increasingly. And we know with the politics in Florida in particular, and I don't want to upset, I gave a reading in Wilmington, and I was really afraid I was rubbing some people wrong. But, in Florida, the question is who owns history? And I think that is, if you can identify a subtext in something you wrote, I think that might be the subtext of what I wrote. And where does it come from? And there are people who say that the first land battle of the Civil War actually took place someplace in West Virginia, up near Harper's Ferry. So there's a lot of that disagreement. Recently, I interviewed Robert Morgan for a magazine in Kentucky. Appalachian Heritage was the name of it. And we asked him about, well, this is after Gap Creek had become a success. And we said, well, how do you know what history to choose to write about? And Bob said, the gaps historians leave can be filled, and it can be filled with your story, or your story the way that you could imagine it happening. And remember, Bob Morgan was a student of our friend Fred Chappell. And Resa was getting her doctorate at UNCG when Fred was there. And I love this story. I hope I can tell it correctly. She was getting ready to write her dissertation, and Fred said, well, has anyone written about this subject before? And Resa said, well, no. And he said, well, then you can say anything you want. And I'm thinking, well, yeah, One last little anecdote, then I'll get more serious about just reading the poems and no long setups. I have a friend in Greenville who they call the Bagel Man. And he's an Italian guy, John Grillo, who moved there from Queens, New York. And it's a big success, and everyone loves him, and he's generous with the money he makes. And his license plate says Bagel Man on it, and everyone knows who he is. Yeah, and he's just a really cool guy. And one day we were talking about some of this stuff about our political views are very different, his and mine. And he said, well, this is what I have to do because I don't know what's true and what's not. And I don't either. I have an intuition, probably all have a wish that certain things were true, but they might not necessarily be. And he said, this is what I do. I have two TVs in my bagel shop. I keep one on Fox and the other one on CNN. And that way no one comes complaining to me. So the question is, well, who owns history? And my argument is that history is a construction of some kind. Okay, this poem is entitled Building a House of History. In the lot across the street, four men enter my vision, all doing almost what I think they're doing, all building a house, cooperating with the movement of dirt to a designated spot across the yard, all building one house from a single plan. But as I watch, I see ahead of their weary motions the house of my understanding and the house of theirs, though all the while they ignore me, as if the structures we live by differ at the brick foundation, and the house this will become is finished as they begin it, stretched to its imaginary boundaries, so people we have never seen can enter and make it a house of their own. I got a little response from someone who said, one house from the single plan, right? Yeah, well, I think some people think it is, but so, what's the purpose of studying history? And Malika and I talked about this the other day. And this is in some ways a hard poem for me to read. It's entitled The Taste of Rope. It has two parts. One, in my photo album, a boy in Civil War hat carrying a shotgun and flag of stars and bars sits on a horse's swaying back. Furrows where a plow horse harness has worn maps tunnel the horse's sides. Its wet flanks burst against the boy's thighs. Above his wide brim, a cloud strains against dry morning air. Sun half shines. Beneath his chest, the horse's weathered nostrils. Two. Driving through Fauquier County, Virginia, I note a horse head rock decapitated from the mountain. Its distant eyes, deep set, drizzly, its nostrils, soundless and narrow. From across the field separating mountain from road, I hear the tug of harness on a plow horse, the grade of ground beneath a plow. The slow glazed eye of the plow horse follows our car. From the back seat, my son shouts to me, calling the nag pony. I hope my son will never know the taste of rope. Did it? It'd be easier just to read straight through the book, but then, you can't make a representative. So that's the way a parent of a young child might respond to the entire notion of the Civil War. It's everyone who went through it experienced what I called in that poem, the taste of rope. But parents at the time had an entirely different, according to historians, right? And had an entirely different attitude toward that war. This is entitled Waiting for the Flood. Parents watched, crossing bony fingers for luck. Sunrise, and children step into the hoarse throat of despair their fathers have carried like muskets. The old know to bow, even young sunlight returns the flood of their eyes. Together, they stand on Matthews Hill above Bull Run, twisting leather flesh into baskets of prayer. To one side of the hill, tiny bird wings of pain flutter in the dark. On the open field, sunrise spreads over layers of haze, softly as fingers fall apart, silently as prayers slip from lips, the children's eyes open like graves. Isn't that a nice photo? Someone who's seen the book remarked that there aren't any people that you can see in these photos. And Resa has a photo that she took when we were in South Africa, staying in a guest house. And swear to God, there was something in that room that we couldn't see that wanted to be acknowledged, and it showed up in the photo. So what I told my friend who pointed out that there are no people in this, well, that, could very easily, we don't see and hear everything that's there. And so I'm looking at this and we don't see any people here. But, there are people there who we're honoring by having this photograph. And I think you'll see that as a pattern. Okay. When you write poems over a 50-year period, you learn a lot about yourself and your evolution. I'd go into the Battlefield Park and jog every day after I taught. And sometimes I would intentionally wait until just at dusk in order to have the whole kind of paranormal experience. So how do we take ownership of our history? Something happened in 1861. How do we take ownership of it over 100 years later? Well, I think we do it by living in it and by putting our mark there too. This is entitled Running at the Manassas Battlefield. Today, my son runs with me, his first day out. This is simple ritual, not a bear hunt or a search for claw marks in the mud. This is just a run, our heads down, my son in front of me, leaning beneath the tree that rips patterns of limbs across my ribs. Moving downhill, twisting from a branch, my foot latches anyway beneath the tree's raw roots, and I throw out my hands until I skid to a stop on my elbows. My son has already turned toward the park, having learned his way through this blueprint of First Manassas, and cautiously eyes the statue of Jackson, whose stone chest furrows from watching men fall to their deaths at the First Battle of Manassas, those whose names crowd my sleep. I, too, look up at Jackson painfully from the battlefield's floor. So some people, Joe Bethanti blurbed the book, and he said my narrator was obsessive. And of course, a lot of these poems are almost confessional. And so there is a little obsession there, but I would contend that the poems of mine that I wrote best were ones where I was, using his word, obsessed with the subject. And, just staying with it and it pounding away in my dreams until I had to write it down. This is entitled Boots. I awaken from depths of Sabbath quiet. Night blurs my eyes. In the corner, muddy boots, open graves of yesterday's travels. Empty holes, they glow from the floor. I roll to my side, taking them with me. Beneath my slow, drowsy lids, I retrace the path I walked the night before. Here's a little bit more, I think, on my narrator's obsession. Now, how do you explain that? I mean, you're all writers. I've read your work. You're all terrific writers, and it's humbling to have you here listening to this. But I think that something happens with this obsession, and somehow or other we hear narrators sometimes who can tell our stories better than we can if we did it in that first person narrator where the poet is the one who's speaking. And how do you explain to anyone? And I think this poem tries to explain. Paste. You might have thought I was making paste with my feet in the mud. Again, you found me walking barefoot through boneyards of the past. If I tell you how often I've made this journey through the skull alone. How often I've watched rain level boundaries of my footprints. You'd still hold before me limbs of trees, leaves of flesh left from passing carelessly through the woods alone at night. But this is no paste. Again and again, I'm measuring my life against footprints flooded by rain. So one of the things I was going to do when I was in Greenville recently, but then everything changed and we had to come out here. We're in Nags Head. We're about 2 football fields away from the ocean. So this thing kind of fell through, inadvertently. And I was going to speak to a folklore class, Jim Kirkland's folklore class, because you might remember Jim. And we thought that it would be fun if we maybe set some time aside and did a project on when does history become folklore and vice versa. So the first time I asked any questions about the Manassas Battlefield, I saw a guy with a little badge on his shirt. And I said, "What can you tell me about this place?" And he pointed at a tree and he said, "People say that's the hanging tree." And I said, "Well, what do you mean people say?" He said, "Well, no historian has been able to verify that, but we believe that soldiers from both sides, depending who had the upper hand at the moment, hanged people." And this is entitled Hanging Tree. And I think it's an example of the way folklore can enter a poem too. I'm glad I wasn't afraid to do that. I couldn't find any verification for it. And at first I wanted to write, the book, the historical book about the Manassas Battlefield. But that isn't what I ended up doing. And I think I'm grateful of that. Hanging Tree. And there it is. That's the very tree. And Resa discovered it. I don't think at that point, I was even pointing at things and saying, "Get a picture of that." But she discovered it and she matched all the photos with the poems, which I think is remarkable. If you're doing an ekphrastic poem, you know the work of art that it's based upon. But when you're doing it the way that we do it, have done it, and other people have done it, Tim Peeler and his photographer, and Keith Flynn has a book similarly, then it's a little bit more demanding work. You have to participate imaginatively. Okay, I'm gonna move ahead here so I don't take up the whole time. Hanging Tree. It forces remembrance of something swinging through the night, a tree limb following the moon's slow arc, a gate door loose among tall weeds. I remember the sound of an empty hand exploding silence and an audience whose eyes form circles against a background of setting sun and Blue Ridge Mountain. Hives of passion rise to my arms as a horse jolts forward beneath a lifeless branch of tree. And the horse, too, remembers slow pain against its rump as the weight he carries pulls backward, pulled by the hanging tree, which has no pulse, though I've seen it shake in my dreams from the weight of something dressed for war, dying in its boots, something swinging, hanging, moving its legs as though to run. I'm gonna have to move a little faster here. I'm sorry, I'm talking so much. So the son I ran with every Sunday, we called it walk runs. He was only about 4 or 5 years old, but he was smart and inquisitive. It was my son, Jason. And Jason is 51 or 52 years old now. And he's going to be in Huntersville when I read there. So some of these poems are going to be very personal for the two of us. And one of us is going to cry. And it won't be me, will it, honey? No. Fog at the Manassas Battlefield for Jason. Thank you. Pines rise above the fog like pointed beaks of birds. Far below where I walk with my son, fog might once have been smoke where man burned through the echoes of war. At this thought-turned word, we stop, my son and I, to watch what forms against the air, what rises from our shallow lips like breaths of dying men and boys young as mine, whose faces shimmered through the trees. When we lean against a stump, I'm an ear closer to my son until his warm breath turns fog against my cheek. His white whisper tells me, listen. All around us, old trees ache with wind, birds crack through trees, and the moon, cold and alone, rolls through low branches into bushes at our feet. That's an amazing photo, I think. I love it. So in that poem, I think I'm already starting to touch on how we, as people living 100 and however many years since the historical event, nonetheless process the event through our own experience. And this is another kind of ritual poem that has its place in the battlefield or nearby. It's entitled Tobacco Fields. And when I wrote this, I was thinking about Jason's maturation. And now that our son Antonio is, 19 and probably in a bar in Madrid right now, I think of how he matured. There's that point where the ritual kicks in. Tobacco fields. Each year we wonder how Bull Run survives the heat, how sun along its banks passes slim as water snakes through branches to startle life, despite forgotten rain, unfolded grass. This is tobacco season, and we are long drawn and thin this year as last, recalling lines of tobacco, hunched and silent. This is tobacco season, and we dream of narrow paths through rows and rows, recalling children who discovered in these fields their own shiny reflections, their own slim dreams of features that wave out in front of them in the sunshine, in the Virginia heat. And we recall harvest come at last, so thick we smell it in this late summer perfume, so rich we know its presence in our children's eyes, in their smiles, tobacco juice running when they speak, smelling of earth, of youth, of this season that has come without warning into our fields, into our lives. So here's the, certainly the young men who fought in the Civil War had to face their own fear and had to determine, if they were going to be able to mature in the way that you had to in order to take part in that kind of close-up contact, more like getting in a fight in a bar than like shooting someone across the street. This is entitled Deserters, and it's one of my poems where I tried to connect this project with Civil War history that has been certified in some way. So this is an epigraph to the poem. The poem is entitled Deserters. The first battle of Bull Run showed that it would take months of stern discipline to harden the farm hands, store clerks, bookkeepers, brakemen, and teamsters so that they would stand in the face of fire. Deserters. They begin their march toward home unexpectedly at first, surprised themselves to feel packs on their backs. Once in the cover of the woods, they understand they have planned all along to stretch out one leather-soled trudge, then another, until puffs of dust rise rhythmically to their nostrils, easy at first as early morning ballet. Later, miles from camp and hungry, when wind shoves against their struggling forms, they learn what the miner knows when he lifts himself from the pit, feeling all over the weight of his body, the strength of air. So once we see our kids hit this point of resolution, we wonder what will become of them then. This poem is entitled The New Start. Soldiers too prayed for rain at first like penitents, begging to begin again, fresh fluids floating around them like indulgences. They prayed for a holy rain, the rain of forgiveness, that would lift them slightly higher, a rain that would leave the miracle of shadow on the ground where puddles ended, shadows of angels they've believed in. The rain does not fall like the voices of politicians. The noisy priests of war do not dispense waters to sustain us, our bodies, our earth. Instead, soldiers that we are, we grind clouds with every acid breath, every carbon embrace, until we recognize our prayer for something with gills and lungs, something that will splash to shore. How are we doing time-wise?
I think we're doing great. I'm happy. I'm just enjoying and taking notes here. I'm gonna have to look at the chat section just because I'm taking so many notes. Please keep
Well,
going, Zach.
you're the only one who knows that there's going to be a test.
That's right.
Yeah, I think I'm about through what I had hoped to read. This is entitled War Plans. And it's the way that history comes to us, of course. This is from a book entitled First Manassas by V.C. Jones. It was common knowledge that there would be dancing at Fairfax Courthouse after the Northerners had driven the Southerners back to Richmond. You know, it takes some courage for me to say that here in North Carolina, but the doors are locked, you know, the whiskey's gone, no reason to come in here. War plans. Plans made, thoughts already easing into victory at Manassas. Women were sent to Fairfax, women with hair pinned into buns and packed into flowered hats. Soldiers dancing around them danced the dust, danced the heat. And with each step, dust exploded the air, heat boiled the skin until pellets the size of tears rolled to the forehead, danced to the ground. There would be dancing through the streets and in the courthouse, a war plan that would surely take Confederates by surprise. Part of the plan, hoop marks on the ground. Part of the plan, perfume ties tucked into collars. The young soldier's feet ached from the thought of so much dancing, so he leaned back and on the ground into the flesh of meshed knuckles. No one dances dreams of death. No one plans a monster military picnic and carries Blood's tools down Warrenton's pike. No one brushing dust from a musket polishes the barrel with plans. That brings Mike Tyson to mind. Everyone's got a plan until they get hit. Okay. Provisions. This is the poem that took place near the Stone Bridge. And this is the inscription from that first Manassas book. Another delaying factor was a 30-pound parrot gun attached to Tyler's division. It was to open the firing at Stone Bridge and might even turn out to be the deciding factor, for it was looked upon as a mighty weapon. Provisions. I want to point out what this is. Yeah, these are the rifles they were waiting for, or, you know, replicas. Provisions. Soldiers in front tuck away fear like provisions they'll draw from tomorrow. Their horses swallow miles of hills and dust. Chickens, too slow to lunge aside, explode into feathers on the road. But when soldiers pull up short to rest, to wait for the walking young to fill in behind, even the earth suffers jolts and shocks of delay. War waits for the child's bones to harden, waits for feelings to flatten against boot heels. Soldiers up front wait for the weary to walk roads of despair, so thick, feet pull from the ground, legs vibrate, limp-kneed in wool pants, arms swell beneath the weight of heat, rising in waves on the road ahead. Even the hot brain planning tomorrow's war hisses in the sun. Cold shocks of Bull Run send shivers of Confederate laughter to shore. And the Yankee soldiers gather in moonlight to wait for the mighty weapon, as they sit through this delay, pulling a small parcel of fear from their packs, passing it from mouth to mouth. I think this would be the last poem I'll read. I appreciate your patience with me. I've read in front of a band. I used to share space with Mike Hamer, and he would hit his hammered dulcimer, and I'd read. And one time, Mike actually invited an MFA dance student, beautiful, beautiful young woman with incredible dance talents, to dance around while he was pounding out, the rhythm to my poem, and I was reading. And it was only like 2 or 3 poems that I realized he was playing in order to get her to dance a particular way. So it got really exotic. And after a while, I felt like, poems were very secondary. I think that through all of this, you can see that there's kind of a growing consciousness of something. And what do we learn then from then that we take into the present? And this is a poem of mine that's right near 50 years old. And it's, boy, I'll tell you, it's done double duty. It was on the Poets Against the War website, and an editor, Alley Hoey was his name, edited Banjo Press in Syracuse. And I write about this in my introduction. And Alan published it as a pamphlet. And I said, well, it's just one poem. And he said, well, let's see what happens. And a sociology professor at Syracuse University adopted that book for use in a graduate sociology class that she had, because it gave her a chance to talk about violence in a way, alternative to all the facts and statistics and data that you get in a textbook. This poem is entitled Violence, and it's in 4 parts. A man never knows what will happen if someone places a gun in his hands. Will fingers freeze on the trigger and skin tear when the hand is pried from steel? Will long shadows press closer together into the corner of the room until someone decides, this is murder? I will do it over and over again. I will do it. 2. Maybe you're walking down the street when you hear something metal slip through the hole in your pocket. You keep walking until you hear it again. You wonder what in this life could so strongly want to be lost. A coin, a gold filling from the newly dead. Maybe you're walking down the street when you hear someone call your name, and when you turn, it's your son carrying his best memories of you in a box the size of his thumb, and the sound of metal hitting the sidewalk, of something trying so hard to be lost in this lifetime, follows you home and calls you father. With all his might, calls you father. Part 3. They're trying to get me. That's the door is locking. They're not going to get me. Resa's here. Part 3. There are men who keep violence by their beds all night as though they can prevent their dreams. I knew a man who slept with a knife under his pillow. Once, when his wife returned with a cup of water, he jumped at her from the shadows, the knife shining beneath her throat like the eyes of blind men. And when he turned back to his sleep, he dreamed of children stabbing the backs of their hands with sharpened pencils until blood rushed to the ground. All around them, a halo of gray shouted from the dream, and he awoke, jabbing the backs of his hands with the knife. Part 4. I know you haven't listened since the beginning. This talk of violence, eating the hearts of children and frightened old men who, like me, take their terror with warm milk and a bit of chocolate. But there are corners of the room filled with hours no one has named, colors only the blind know, and shades so subtle we call them black. There's smoke right now, curling to the top of this page, smoke drowning someone's last shout, the shout we all hear when deep in our dreams, our lovers whisper in our ears. Right now, there are fingernails chewed to the flesh, blood slowly driven to the surface. And there are men throwing their wives through windows and women beating their children. And there are children dancing around us, their faces pink and bloated, their lips moving like triggers, slowly, cautiously, aiming at you. Thank you. Been very patient with me. I appreciate it.
Holy smoke. If y'all want to unmute, please do. That last, oh my gosh, all of it, but
Beautiful.
Thank you very much. I can't tell you how much I appreciate you all being here and listening
Yeah.
to it. And here's some Irish whiskey. Here's
That was superb, Pat. You know,
Yeah.
I mean, it's
Adrian,
it's
thank you so much.
one of those readings when you're like, okay, I really am looking forward to reading this book. You know, like just to go back to what I've heard. There'll be little snippets that, you know, like Malika's like kind of writing some of them down there, but you just know they're already in there, you know, and it's like, hey, I actually really want to get this thing, you know.
That's great.
yeah, I couldn't even
Well, I
keep
appreciate it.
up. There were so many. Adrian,
Yeah.
I was trying to type because I'm like, I don't want to lose this. I don't want to, but like, I didn't want to stop listening. So you caught me, Pat.
All
Heavy.
of your
I can try
last
this time.
lines were fabulous. Like they
Yeah.
all packed a punch.
Yeah.
Well, thank
Yeah.
you. Thank you.
And the
I think
photos were superb too. I mean, it's just such a
Yeah.
lovely, just a smart package, you know.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And I had a
Thank you.
question because the role of shadow in the photograph started to have like something larger for me in the context of the poems being read. And I really wanted to ask Resa if that was conscious. Like, to me, that started to have its own mythology alongside the difficult terrains of the poems. The way you caught shadows. And I was just like, is that intentional or is it like, how is that being built together? The you know, to me, how shadows became its own thing within the poems.
I'm not really sure how to address that because I can't say that it was intentional when I took the photos, but
Yeah.
in pairing photos with poems, I always look at the overall composition of the photo.
Yeah.
But I didn't think specifically about shadows except in certain poems. Like I
Yeah,
thought that
okay, I was just
the hanging tree poem and the photo that goes with that, I wanted that one for the light and the shadows.
yeah. I have to tell you, that one's one when I first started resonating. Adrian, you said something?
Yeah, I just wanted to double check. Was that I asked, you know, the Deserters poem?
Mhm.
Was that the hanging tree again, straight ahead? Was that like
No.
intentional?
Oh, it
No, that's a
wasn't?
different
Oh my gosh,
tree.
it looks
Is
just
it?
like it.
Because it
I
looks
thought
so,
that
I thought it was like you were wonderfully implying that that's where the deserters are headed for.
It could
Oh,
be.
I like that idea.
So you
It
can
could
steal that
be.
if you want. You definitely meant it.
yeah. Yeah, no, I thought the same thing because it looked like it was just a
Yeah,
further back
further
view
away,
and
yeah,
like
yeah.
that long road to the destiny of hanging.
Yeah,
Yeah, I
and
thought
I
that was
thought like,
purposeful as
wow, you
well.
know,
Yeah,
maybe
that's
even
interesting. Yeah.
maybe even some of the people who had to be involved in hanging were
Mhm.
then actually
Yeah.
on their own way to being hung, you know, at the same tree, which is kind of
Yeah,
interesting.
especially
Cool.
if they're fighting back and forth over
Yeah.
territory.
Yeah.
You know, because the person who's doing the hanging one day would be the hanged the next day.
That's it. I thought that was like that was a beautiful double play. So you have to tell people you meant it. You know?
Yeah, exactly. Claim it. Oh yeah. No.
You know, Teresa's the kind to say that it was your idea.
Yeah, I know. It's just like
Makes you go,
some vague Irishman somewhere said something, and he got it right. You know, that's exactly what I intended.
This is
You know,
great
I have to
feedback.
tell you,
I love this.
Resa, I miss the ghost photo. Pat, you briefly mentioned it, but I got to see it. No one else did. Do y'all mind sharing it with them as well?
No, I think I can pull it up pretty
If you
quickly.
can click, because I want them to see that, because there's such haunting within these poems, and I'll come back to that, but there's an actual
Go ahead,
photograph where I just want other people to have that experience, because it kind of, to me, was really amazing.
We passed it.
I know. I took, did you see the one, Malika, that was two that were, well, I'll put these up
Those are the
together.
ones
So
she
there's a
said.
staircase, there's a staircase and the hand is
Yes,
to the
I-
ghost is to the left. And I can't
Yeah, I
remember
know.
which poem.
I know the photo that you mean, and I have it here.
Okay.
So let me show it to you. I
Yay.
did have I have another slide that excuse me,
There it
that
is.
the
Yep.
hold on, I can't get this to come up. There we go.
There,
Um,
there you are.
this is the photo that Malika is talking about. And you know, when Pat was talking about you can't always be sure what's in the photos that you take until after you see them, this is an instance of that, because when we stayed in this guest house for a couple of weeks,
It was in Cape
and
Town.
yeah, it was in Cape Town, South Africa. And I've looked at this really closely. Some people think that this is a finger that's pointing this way. And you can see up under here, you guys can see the pointer, right?
Yep.
Okay, so you can see up under here, and then also at the top, it looks like there's movement.
Yeah.
It looks like there's a hand that's in the process of moving. But if
Okay.
you also look right here, these to me look like lips. This looks like a nose with maybe a hat down low over the face.
Mhm.
So, and there are two other photos in the slideshow that y'all saw that have orbs in them. So, I mean,
That just-
hanging tree is one of them. There's an orb right here.
That's
You
a
can't-
great pair of photos
You
right there. I
can't
love that.
see it as well as you can some of the other ones because of the lighting at the time of day that this was taken. But there is another, let me
Mhm.
see if I can go back to this and I'll show you.
And that's why the
Maybe
whole book
Yeah.
is, you know, there was other ones that I was like, there, I mean, thank you for showing that, because I think that's part of the whole experience of the book and the collaboration.
Yeah, and I'll just show
is
y'all
the
the
anomalies.
other orb that I've found in here. And I have not gone through and scoured all the photos that I have, but this one right here is almost a perfectly formed circle, which is typical of orbs. So, I mean, you know,
Yeah.
you might be taking photos and you think that there's nothing there, and there might be more than you think that's there.
It's awesome.
Beautiful work, beautiful work. We had, when we realized we were going to be given 6 or 7 different readings just in April, we decided that we'd put together different groups of poems. And to poets like yourselves, we would try to give you a more, I think, intellectual perspective on the book. You know, what is history? Who owns it? How does it affect us 160 years later? But I don't mean to belittle students by any means. My students were great. Chris was a student of mine. He was great. But we're supposed to read. We read last week in Wilmington at Cape Fear Community College, and the students had, you know how it is. They had to be there, and this and that, and we thought that reading poems about paranormal activity in the battlefield would keep them interested. And so that's what we did. When we go to Elon, we're going to read at Elon in about 2 weeks. And we're going to use that reading there again,
Mhm.
because I think that it will keep students interested. And we
Mhm.
get to talk, you know, and so that's why we had that pairing of those two. And we're going to use that next time we give a reading, which will be in about 2 weeks.
Well, it's definitely working, because this framework that you set up here was certainly interesting to me, you know, and as somebody interested in that era, you know, it's just so compelling to hear those questions about history as a framework were really just carried through your whole reading. And
The questions, yeah.
and I love the way you
Yeah.
brought together, I love the way that your poems bring together the lyric and the place and the history and and then I don't know, it was so compelling that you managed to sort of bring together various angles of poetry, in one. And I mean, I always knew that, I guess, about your poems, but it was just really great to hear them and to think about the things that you used to teach me, and other students about, the way that you
Phew.
approach it, the
Yeah.
way that your poetics, that your economy and the way the economy of your poems, it all felt so familiar to me in a way.
Oh, good. I
Yeah,
appreciate that.
just beautiful. I loved it.
Thank you. Thank you
Yeah.
so much.
Yeah,
It was interesting to hear you talk about that, Chris, for knowing him as a teacher and then
Yeah.
seeing, how he navigates
Yeah.
and puts into action the things that he was teaching in such a amazing way. I mean, these are incredibly well-crafted, well thought out poems that are
Right.
powerful in and of themselves, but the way they're built is magnificent.
Yeah. Well, I remember the things that you would cut, or suggest cutting in poems, and those things are also not in your poems. They're the way that everything that's there is what needs to be there, and nothing more, and that approach I definitely got from you, and so when I'm hearing your poems, I'm thinking like, yeah, that's I admire those moves, in your poems because they're the things that make sense to me now, and I don't know, it's just great to see it. And the way you bring it together, like I said, I mean that the parts of your poems that personify the elements of the place, that's such a great way to make the poems bloom, I just love the way that they kind of expand in those moments when you pick a thing that's like, a piece of, a shadow or something that's in there and it just becomes personified or it enlarges and takes on a role in the poem. And that's just really, I don't know, it was great to see all of those things coming together in your poems. Really enjoyed it.
Well, thank you so much.
Yeah,
It's
I
so
can't wait
great
to
to
get
see
the
you.
book and read them.
You and I need to stay in touch.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, definitely.
Really, really.
Yeah,
Sorry, go
I
ahead.
gotta take a
I was just
ride
gonna let
at 8, so I can't hang much longer. But it was so great I'm so glad to come and hear this. And Resa, yeah, I'm gonna Venmo you so I can get a copy.
Okay, great.
Photographs are amazing too. I don't think I knew that about I didn't know that you were into photography. I don't know that was that like a thing you've always been doing?
No, it's just something that I picked up, more later in my life. And for this particular project, this is the first time that I've published
Oh,
photographs. I
okay.
mean, with the exception of book covers and photographs of authors. I mean, I've done those, but it makes me kind of nervous when people call me a photographer because I feel very, very much an amateur in that setting. But one of my friends told me, she said, "Hey, you had a camera, you took pictures, you're a photographer."
Yeah, you thought about what you were doing, right? Like
Yeah.
Yeah.
that's that's it, right? And you did
Could
a
be.
beautiful job.
We're going to do another one like that. We're going to,
Oh, that's great.
yeah, we got some plans. We'll see where they go. Look, it's
got
so
some
great.
plans.
Oh, we
Yeah,
have
well,
plans.
thank you
I'm
so much.
know that.
Yeah.
And Malika, you noticed, Malika, that I didn't cry when I read that poem this time.
I was over here just holding my breath and just as powerful, Pat, and fabulous. I mean, I know what that took. I know what that took.
Practiced it all yesterday. Just before we got online with y'all, I read it to Resa and I said, "Listen to this. My voice is not even going to crack. Isn't that right?" And you're proud of me, aren't you?
I am.
I'm
I
proud of
almost
you.
unmuted for a moment and went, nailed it. No,
This
just
has
a
been real great.
powerful reading, and I just deeply appreciate everybody being here, and I love the discussion. I have to say, I'm incredibly fascinated by the concept of history and how, you know, who owns it and how we interact with it and how we fill in the gaps. That all holds so much to me. I almost want to give everybody a copy of the chat section, because I felt like there was a couple of things that you said that I put in there that's kind of like place markers I wanted to come back to. Very similar to what Adrian was saying. I need to get the book so I can, you know, spend some time in there. You hit something, Christopher, that kind of resonated with me, was like how images kind of built on themselves. And of course, everybody knows I'm horse obsessed, but the horse started to have like really mythological thing, or like huge, larger than life things throughout the poems. And I felt like they were progressing and building off of each other. And I thought that that was very masterful, very skilled, and to me, of deeper interest. It made me want to spend more time seeing how that was talking to each other. So
Yeah.
it's fabulous when there's a reading that's so well thought out. I want to thank y'all for that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Are
Thank
there any
you.
questions?
Thank
Did I
you.
miss anything?
About the
People have?
photographs, about the photographs,
Yeah.
you know, the couple of very striking moon images
Aren't
and
those
whatever.
amazing?
Well, what kept coming to me, Pat, and I don't know, it came to me, one of the most beautiful, kind of shocking, you know, like, my goodness, nobody has said that or done that before, was Charles Wright, where he talks about the moon as a white hole, you know, like a black hole,
Yeah,
but a white hole.
exactly. Yeah,
And I kept
yeah.
saying those images to me were like a version of that, that the moon was being, how you were talking about the moon in the poem, and then the photograph. It was like something that wasn't a black hole, but it was a white hole. You know, it
Yeah.
was
There's a
more
presence, yeah.
yeah, and it was more like kind of, you don't want to get, I don't want to get airy with it in some kind of uh you know, the kind of the horror of a black hole, you know, everything's sucked into it, even light,
Yeah.
and it can't escape. And the moon in your poems and the moon in those images were, your sympathy, your empathy was being enlisted into almost, well, maybe the pain of these people and the trauma and whatever is being soothed by that white hole. You know, it's being,
Yeah.
you know, anyway, I'm starting to write a poem probably for you, Pat, but
Oh, great.
you know,
Do it.
That's beautiful. That's beautiful.
it's very rare when
Yeah, I was
when
gonna say I wanted you to keep going because I felt like we were seeing it written in real time.
yeah, I need that, but then you would only steal it. Poets steal, so I can't do that. I can't keep
Yeah.
going.
Well, you know, I steal. Where's Chris still here? I steal by saying you need to cut that out of your poem,
Yeah.
and I take it.
That's right. That's
What was
right.
it, what was that saying? Bad poets borrow, good poets steal.
Yeah.
I want to say
Anyway,
one thing to Chris.
That's awesome.
I saw it
Go
as a
ahead.
white hole. I loved those, Resa. I loved it was like a
It's an
white hole. It
amazing
was
photograph.
Charles Wright's white hole I was seeing. If that doesn't sound ridiculous and rude.
Look at, I'm just
Pause
getting
the
started on this
recording.
Irish whiskey. Chris has a book that just came out a couple of years ago now that kind of assesses the whole notion of masculinity in our culture.
Right.
And I was wondering, Chris, if some of my poems would fit with that. I'm thinking we should do something with that.
I think you, yeah, I think they absolutely do. You know, I've got a poem, a reenactment poem in there too, that a lot of times when I was listening to your poems, I was just thinking about that. I mean, anyway, yes, they definitely, you know, your poems face in a lot of directions, you know, and I really admire that. I also, you know, that the Taste of Rote poem, you know, I was thinking about this idea I always have about horses, you know, this concept of generational trauma. I always think about horses that way, you know, because I think, like, what other animal carries more generational trauma than horses?
Exactly.
I mean, could there be
Exactly.
anything else, you know? And I know I'm not a particularly a horse person, but ever since I've thought of that idea, I mean, but I thought of that again reading your poems, you know. I mean, obviously because of war, but also because of how closely you looked at horse horses in a couple of those poems too, and it was moving.
It's a language we throw around. Like Jason was in the bag. Jason was one. I don't know if you met Jay. You probably knew Jason more likely than Antonio.
Yeah, I think I may have met him. But yeah.
Yeah, and Jason was in the back seat. He was only 5 or 6 years old, and we're driving through Fauquier County, is adjacent to Prince William County, where Manassas is. And we were driving to, he had a youth soccer game, he had a soccer game or something. We're driving there, and I saw the horse, and I was saying, well, Jason's going to have to say something. And he called, this is the most beat down horse I'd ever seen in my life. And the horse is kind of looking at us like, oh, you're one of them, And Jason looked, he said, Daddy, it's a pony. I said, "Boo." And then I started thinking a little bit about, the kind of derogatory language we use to describe animals other than human beings.
Sure.
And he said that nag was a pony. And I should put quotation marks around pony in the poem, but I didn't, because I couldn't hit that key that day or something. I don't know. But so great, man.
Yeah.
How about
What you were saying?
We'll talk, Chris.
Yeah,
I
we
was
will.
gonna
And I'm gonna let you all go. I've got to take a ride. I apologize, but it's beautiful. I'm so happy to have come, and I look forward to.
So glad to reunite with you, man.
Yeah, man.
This is
definitely.
great for me.
Yeah, and
Chris, your book is still considered new enough that we could celebrate if you were interested in that. I'd love to have you,
sure,
come
let's
one
talk.
Thursday.
Oh, that'd be great.
And
Yeah.
also, I was going to suggest The Donkey Elegies by Nicole Brown if you haven't already read it,
Oh, okay. No, I haven't.
because I think that will connect in with what you're talking about. And the partnership of horses with combat vets is something that we do here to work with PTSD.
Oh, I'm
That's
sure.
right.
But
The
the
work
Donkey
on the
Elegies,
is amazing.
Nicole
That's
Brown.
cute. Okay, I'll write that down.
I-
Thank you.
What a
I think
great
it'll
group
blow
there.
your
My
mind. I
God.
think it's similar to what you're navigating.
Yeah. Well, thank you. And good night to all you all. Good luck.
See you, Chris.
Chris, I'm going to message you. I'm going to send you my
Okay.
phone number.
Yeah,
Okay.
please do. All
I
right.
will.
Good night.
Take care, buddy.
Before I forget,
Awesome. So we can move to
Sorry, I was just going to say, Pat,
open mic.
before I forget, your deserter
Okay.
poem. The whole time you were reading it, I was thinking of W.B. Yeats' Cuchulainn Comforted, where, the great Cuchulainn, one of Yeats's last poems, that he wrote on his deathbed.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Where Cuchulainn is among the shrouds, when he dies, and the people that he ends up with and that he's actually interacting with are the deserters, or people who have been cowards in battle. And, they change their form in the poem, and they have the voice of birds. But the idea that Yeats would put Cuchulainn, the Ulster warrior, mythological warrior, comforted by deserters, and that there was like a kind of an acknowledgement between Cuchulainn and them that they were the same, they were whatever human or whatever Cuchulainn was, that, these deserters, he was becoming part of them and understanding them, rather than being the big, violent, warlike hero. It's an amazing poem, Cuchulainn Comforted. I'm sure you know it, but your deserter poem, I expected you to have like an epigraph from Cuchulainn Comforted.
That's
that
a
would
really
be
good
like,
idea. But
that would be, they'd changed their
I'm
voices.
going to
And,
go back to that poem.
yeah, and had the voice of birds,
Wow. Yeah.
Extraordinary. You'd love it. You'd love it.
Well, there's Yeats in a few of these poems, actually. And you probably heard it.
Yeah.
And wow.
So get that in there.
When I come to Hickory, we're going to have to get together.
Oh, that will be a
I was
I was gonna
norm.
say y'all are already collaborating
Yeah.
over white holes and so
Yep,
it's on
yeah.
now.
It's on, all right.
The rewrite, the redux. No.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
we will head towards open mic. I've got Christy, Catherine, and Adrian, and just jump on in, Christy.
Okay, so this is going to be part of a new collection. I keep saying that, but I'm in a bit of a drought right this minute writing. So I hope that in the next few months, I can actually say I'm close to
Yes.
finishing. a manuscript, but here we go. This is called Folding Myself into an Origami Girl. Each crease a word, on place, on purpose, with its own premonition. Thank you.
Wow.
Nice.
Ah,
Thank you, Chris.
Oregon, I love everything about that poem, Christy. And droughts happen, it's ebb and flow. I have no doubts.
I'm far
Just
enough
trust
along that I can
process.
say this will be the first poem in the book. So I'm starting to put things together.
That's a beautiful thing. Beautiful. Thanks, Christy. Catherine, don't forget to unmute.
Me to go, or do you want Catherine?
Okay. This poem is called Athena, and also I want to thank Patrick and Resa. Very powerful.
Thank you so
book.
much.
Yes, and I grew up in the Syracuse area, so I'm always glad to hear things.
Hear the name of the town, right? Yeah, by someone other than the weatherman in the winter.
Yeah, yes, that's right. This is called Athena. Approaching me, majestic and graceful, soulful eyes look into mine. Affectionate guardian, eyes shining, bred to be faithful. Clothed in harlequin, your presence palatial. Head nuzzles my lap as you incline to greet me, majestic and graceful. Soulful eyes look into mine. Our connection clear in your facial expression speaks to me, Dane divine. Together we age, aware of waning time. For all the years we've shared, I'm thankful. Great guardian, majestic and graceful.
Beautiful.
Oh, thank you, Catherine. I don't know why that just brought me the image of how my hair now matches my, what I used to call young mare, who's now an old mare. And as we've aged, we become strawberry blonde. So I don't know why but thank you for that gift. Oh, I love that. That just really brought that connection, aging together. That's beautiful. And
Thank you.
Adrian, we are coming to you. You are our
Okay.
kickoff finale.
Well, I didn't even think I'd be reading a poem, but Pat would probably know from my silly Facebook, but I have the manuscript being proofed of my new book,
Oh,
The
good.
Chances of
Good.
Harm. So it's
good.
where I've proofed it. So, we've got the cover now, and I have all the blurbs and all the rest of
Awesome.
it. So I have it right here. So I'll read the title poem from it. Would that do? Yeah.
That would be great.
It'd be wonderful.
Yes.
And it's called The Chances of Harm. I'm excited about the fact that we got if I may just tell you this quickly, we got, the poem is about me going into the graveyard that we walk the dog round here in Hickory, Oakwood Cemetery. And it was a beautiful day during the COVID era, and I was on my own. And as I went into the graveyard, squirrels, birds were everywhere, beautiful spring day. And then everything just went completely silent, like an eclipse. But I knew it wasn't an eclipse, and I knew, to look up. And I looked up, and it was a huge, what we call the graveyard hawk, just flying in above me. And all the birds just had stopped. They knew it had entered their space. And I immediately got the opening line, in my head. It arrives like God, living, killing machine. I got the first two lines like that. And then as I was walking around with a little bit of notepaper trying to write as I was taking the dog, I knew that it wasn't going to be a poem. If it was just about the hawk and the birds going, there had to be something else. And on the way out of the graveyard, I normally go a lap and out the same way. But because I was in a rush to get home to write the poem, I went out the bottom of the graveyard instead. And in broad daylight, in the middle of the afternoon, in a huge hedge, like a huge, thick privet hedge with little, holes here and there, not perfect. I looked up and there was a huge owl sitting in the middle of the hedge.
Wow.
And it just slowly blinked its big eyes at me. And then I heard something, from the graveyard behind me. And I just knew, I rushed home. I knew I'd got a poem. I got the phrase linking the chances of harm,
Wow.
because the owl wasn't going to be harmed in the hedge, you know, it was just coolness personified. I wasn't going to be harmed. I was species safe. Neither were the people in the graveyard, but there was a great chance of harm for everything else, you know. So anyway, and my wife took a photograph, funny enough, Resa, about a photograph of that hawk, which appeared on a gravestone as we were walking about a year later. And
Wow.
it sat on the gravestone, and it let us with the dog get to within about 15 feet. And she got these amazing photographs. And then it just took off. And I said to Kevin Morgan Watson in Press 53, we know the title of the book, we know the poems, but I really want this to be the cover image, but I can't just have it as a graveyard thing. And he said, I agree, brilliant photograph, but it's not going to work as a cover. And then just recently I went back to it, and my son Micah, the 14-year-old whiz kid, you know, he just said, I can take that image and make it a cover. And so he took everything out of the background except for the hawk and the gravestone. And it's a jet black background, and it looks like a painting now. And it's the cover of the book. You know?
Wow.
So
Yay.
That's great.
we've got the actual hawk, you know, on the cover, you know. But anyway, sorry, I'm boring you to tears. The chances of harm. The chances of harm. It arrives like God, living killing machine, silent hearse of the air, rolling in on no wheels, makes perfect weight between wide wings, uttermost branch of the tallest tree, all judge and jury, Lord of no doubt. I am species safe, so too the buried bones of these fields of death, whose headstones are tills awaiting the cha-ching of the last trump. A big daylight owl seems unimpressed, blinking the chances of harm. A cardinal goes off like a car alarm. So I think that
Love
the
it.
hawk took the cardinal, you know.
Wow. What
But
a
anyway,
line.
there you go.
Phew.
I love it. And I was thinking, Adrian, it'd be nice, maybe you and Molly, we could do a dual book launch together,
Sure,
just whenever
That'd
that
be
works
great.
out.
that would
Because
be
I think
great.
that would be a really powerful way to,
That'd
celebrate.
be lovely. And we could sit in the
Awesome.
same place, just like Resa and Pat.
Yes,
Yeah.
that'd be great. So I'll reach out to you about that.
That's lovely.
Pat and Resa, thank you so very much again. That was
Thank you.
amazing. And I
Thank
feel like I
you.
learned a lot just from the discussion. So I deeply appreciate everybody's input and presence here. Once again, a fabulous Thursday. Bye,
Brilliant.
guys. Hope
It
to
was
see you
great to see
sometime
you
soon.
guys, Pat and Resa.
Take
Fantastic.
care of yourself,
Great to see
Chrissy.
you.
See you later.
Take care,
Bye,
buddy.
everybody.
See you later.